Hi guys, I hope everyone is doing well. Today we are going to create a simple full stack web application using Node.js with Express, MySQL, and HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. This project is a great intro into incorporating the front end to the back end and adding a database to it. So here's a demo of the project. So I'm going to add a couple names here, and it'll be filled in into the table. Okay, so let's see what all we can do. So we can add names. We can also search by a name. So we'll do that, and we can keep searching. And let's say if a name doesn't exist, we'll say no data found. So we can also edit a name. So instead of test, we can say test 10. Update it. It'll be updated here. We can also edit this. Cool. So we can edit that. We can also delete. There you go. So this is going to be a simple web app, but there's a lot of functionality into this, and I'll show you what you need to get installed and how to get everything set up. So let's get started. Alright guys, so before we get started into the code, you want to download this XAMPP, which is going to run our local MySQL server. So it's going to look something like this, and let me stop the server. And we're going to run our local MySQL server so that we can connect to that database and set up our tables. We'll get started with that later. We're going to go and do the front end first, and then we'll get into the back end. Okay, so I have my folder structure here. In my project directory, I have two folders. A client and server is just to separate it and make sure that it's not confusing for anyone. So in my client directory, we have index.html, index.js, and stylesheet.css. So I'm going to generate some HTML here by pressing Shift 1, Enter. Oop. There you go. And that'll generate our boilerplate HTML. And we can just say CRUD app here. Let's do something different because I'm going to have this example project that's already done just for reference. So we'll just do... Let's do Express app, or let's do web app. Okay, and then I'm going to right click and open this with live server. So if you guys don't have that extension, you want to download it here and just type in live server and you can just install it right here. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is let's create this name label and with the input and the button. So we're going to have a main tag here. Inside the main tag, we'll have a label. We'll say name. And then we'll have an input of type text. And that should be it. We'll give it a name of, let's give this an ID of name input. Okay, so we have that. And then we also want to add a button here that will just say add name. Okay, so I want to center everything in the middle. It'll just be easier on the eye. So I'm going to link our CSS file. Rel is equal to style sheet. Then we'll give the href. Okay, and let's go ahead and link our script as well. Okay, so now in the CSS, we'll just grab the main tag, and then we're going to say let's do a width of 50%, and let's give a margin of 50 pixels top and bottom, and auto left and right so that it becomes centered. Okay, and then let's add the search button. So let's put this in a div, the search button. So we'll have a label here. Do we need a label? Now we don't need a label. We can just have the input with the placeholder. And we can just say search by name. We'll give this an ID of search input. Okay, and I didn't spell placeholder correctly. And another thing is we need the button as well. Let's do search. And let's give this button an ID of search btn, and let's give this button an ID of add name btn. Okay, let's add some breakpoints here. Okay, and in the main tag, I'm just going to add a text align of center. Okay, so now everything is centered as well. And let's see what else. We need to add the table now. So we're going to add the table. Okay, and well, let's give this ID, let's give this table an ID of table. Okay, and then we're going to give a t head so that we can have our table headers. So we're going to say th, oh. Okay, so here we're going to say ID. Use emit to create 4 more of these since we're going to have 4. So we're going to say name, date, added, delete, and edit. Let's do that. Let's keep it, okay. All right, so let's give some styling to the table here. So in our table, we're going to say table, th, and td. And we're going to give this a border collapse. And we're going to say collapse. So now, and we're also going to add a border of 1 pixel solid. Let's do black. Okay, cool. And let's also give some padding here to the th and the td of 5 pixels. All right. And let's push that down now. So we'll add the margin top to the table itself, not the th and td. So we'll do margin, let's do 50 pixels in auto. There we go. So it's all centered now, and that looks good. So what we're gonna, I think that's it for the HTML. So this no data will be added in the JavaScript file when we're doing our initial call to load all the data. So I think that's really it. That's great. Also, we're going to add a t body here, and it's just going to have empty. It's just going to be empty because we will dynamically insert that using JavaScript. Okay, so now in our JavaScript, first thing we're going to do is we're going to add some event handlers on when the page loads. So when the page first loads, we want to grab all the data that's coming from the database. But if there is no data, we want to show this no data here. Okay, so what we're going to do here is say document.add event listener, and we're going to say DOM content loaded, have a callback function. And let me enlarge this a little so it's easier to see. Okay, so in our callback function, we're going to use the fetch API. But since we don't have our backend set up right now, all we're going to do is we're going to load the no data. So we're going to have a function here called load HTML table. And that's going to take in some data. Okay, so let's say if the data is empty, so for now, I'm just going to call load data, load HTML table, and I'm going to pass in an empty array. So we can say here, if data.length is equal to 0, all we're going to do here is insert a row into our table and just have it say no data. So first thing we want to do above the if statement is say const table is equal to document.query selector, and we want to grab the table body. So we can say table t body, and we should get that. And then we'll have another variable called table HTML. Let's do it like this. Okay, we'll set that to an empty string. So now if the data array is empty, we'll say table.innerHTML is equal to, and we'll add in a table row here. So we can say tr, and then inside the table row, we'll add a table data. And let's give this a class of no data. It's going to be single quote. This class won't add any CSS to it. We'll use it later to see if there's no data, so we'll have to remove that table row. So, and then also we want to have this span across all 5 columns. So we can say call span is equal to 5. And then in here we'll just say no data. Table HTML will come later into play because right now we are just going to use table.innerHTML. So I'm just going to remove this for now. Okay, so now that's it for the, let's see, I think that's it for the front end for now. Let's get into the back end and set up all of our database stuff and our Express app, and let's get that configured so that our Express app is connected to our database and we can make it a fetch call to our backend. Okay, so I have Git open in my terminal here. If you guys don't have that, you'll want to go to the browser and download Git Bash for Windows or Mac or whatever system you have. Okay, so I'm going to use Git here to install our server-side modules. So if you guys don't have Node.js installed, you want to get that installed in order to download packages and, of course, use the Express app. So I'm going to cd into our server directory, and in here I'm going to download a couple things. So I'm going to say npm, okay, so close that. I'm going to say npm install. I'm going to do an init first, -y, so that we have a package.json file. Okay. All right, so now we can say npm install express. And some of these packages will take a couple seconds to install. Okay, so Express is installed now, and we should see it as a dependency here. Yep, we do. And now we're going to install MySQL, which is going to let us interface with the MySQL server and make queries. Okay, so now we have MySQL, and let's also install .env, so we have a place to store all of our configurations for our database, like password, username. It's a good practice to do this so that whenever you push your code to a repository, you're not actually sending your configurations there as well. We're going to install one more package, and it's going to be nodemon. So we're going to say npm install nodemon --save -dev, and this is a very useful module so that every time we make changes to our script, we don't have to restart the server. It'll watch it for us and reload it for us. Okay, so this is a dev dependency. All right, so that should be it for all the modules. And we will need so in our package.json, we have a starting point script here. I'm going to change this to app.js so we don't get confused with our client-side index.js when we have it open. So now I'm going to create a new file and say app.js. Okay, in our app.js, we're going to require some modules here. So we're going to get express, say express is equal to require express. Also, guys, I forgot to install one more. We need to install cores so that we can make API calls from our front end to our back end. So we can say npm install cores. That'll download. If you don't have this installed, you won't be able to make API calls to the back end because you'll get some console errors in the browser. Okay, so now we can say app is equal to express. And we're going to get cores is equal to require cores. And then we'll also bring in .env. And we'll say require.env. Okay, let's create our .env file as well. We'll just say .env. And we'll come back. Let's add in our port number for our backend localhost for our server. Let's make that 5,000. Okay, we'll revisit this later. So I'm just going to close out of it. Now in here, I'm going to say .env.config so that we can access it when we need to. App.use cores so that when we have an incoming API call, it'll not block it and we'll be able to send data to our backend. We'll also use express.json. So express.json. So we'll be able to send it in JSON format. And then we'll just say express.url encoded. We're going to say extended to false, because we're not going to be sending in any form data. Okay, so here we're going to create our routes. So like I told you, we're going to have a create, read, update, and delete route, because I want to show you guys the basics. So this is going to cover the basics of the MySQL queries. So we're going to say so when we're going to use create, we're going to say post. That's basically when you want to create new data. So we're going to give this a / of insert, and then we'll just say request response. Okay, we'll leave it there for now, and I'm just going to copy this, and for now we'll just do it at create. Okay, so at create, before we do create, let's do the read first, because we already set up our JavaScript to when the DOM is loaded, we'll make a fetch call to our backend. So let's do that. Let's do app.get. Let's say get all request response. Okay, and here I'm just going to console.log our request. Sorry, I'm just going to say console.log test, so that we know from when we make an API call, we can see that we've reached our backend. Okay, and now let's go ahead and make an API call. So when the document is loaded, we're going to say fetch. We're going to say HTTP. Okay, before I do this, let's start our local server so that we know that it's running. So we need to say app.listen, and we're going to give the port number. So the way we can grab our port number from our .env file is we can say process.env.server. Let's do port. That's what we gave the name. And then we're going to just say console.log app is running. Okay. And we're CD into our server app. So we can say nodemon app. Okay, so the app is running. Let's just quickly test this. So we can say localhost 5000, and we can say get all. Okay, so we get a console.log of test. So we know our backend is working. So now in our front end, let's get the API fetch call made. So we can say HTTP localhost port 5000 get all. Okay, so now we're going to need to send in, I don't think we need to send any headers. No, we don't need to do that. So we can say .then. So we're going to get a response, and we'll convert this into JSON. We're always going to be expecting a JSON response. Then we're going to get another promise, and we're going to say data. This is where we get the data back in our JSON format, and we'll just console.log the data. Here we'll actually load the HTML table, call it in this. Okay, so now you can see here that we have made let's refresh. So we have made a fetch call, and you can see our test is running every time. Okay, we're not getting any response, so let's go ahead and get that going. So in our app.js, we can simply just say response.json, and let's send a success equal to true. Okay, so here we should get a success is equal to true, which is great. So now let's set up our database so that we can successfully connect to it, and we can also grab data from there, because we want this no data to actually come as a response from our database not actually having any data. Alright guys, so here, okay, I'll stop this. So if you start these two, you should see the port number that it's on. So it's going to be on 3306. Okay, so I'm going to click on admin here, and it's going to open the PHP My Admin. And then in here, we can go to databases. Okay, so we're going to create a new database. So I have these sample databases that I was just working with, and we're going to create a new one. So we can just say, let's say, web app. You can name it whatever you like. And for this tutorial, it doesn't really matter what you pick here, but I'm just going to pick this one. Okay, so I'm going to hit create. Okay, so now we have a table. So in this table, what are we going to store? So we're going to have an ID, we're going to have a name, and we're going to have the date added. So we're going to have 3 columns here. And the name of the table, let's just do CRUD app, CRUD table. We'll just do names. Okay, so in here we're going to have an ID. It's going to be of type int. We'll give that length / values of 11. And we're also going to, let me enlarge this a little. We're going to click on this. So it's going to be auto incremented every single time we add a new row into the table. And then here we're going to just say name. Okay, name is going to be a varchar type, and we can just give it a length of 100. That should be it for that. And then we're going to have a date added column, and this is going to be a type date time. Let's see here. Okay, cool. And that's really it. So we can hit save. So now that we have our name table created, what we can do now is we need to get some privileges like username, password type account that is tied to this database. So we can go to privileges here, and we can create a new one. So we're going to say add new user, and here I'm just going to say let's do web app, and I'm going to say localhost, and password I'm just going to do test123, test123. Okay, so I'm going to generate that. Oh, I do not want to generate a password. I'm going to go back to test123, test123. Okay, so grant all privileges on the database web app, which is what we want, and we'll just hit OK. All right, so now we have a user account that is tied to our web app database, which is exactly what we want. And now we can go back to our .env. Okay, so I'm going to open .env, and here I'm going to say username is equal to web app, password is equal to test123. So this is a great way of storing your database details so that when you actually update your repository, this .env file will not be added to it. So this stuff stays locally on your local computer. And then we also want to add a couple more things that we need for the connection. So we're going to say database, and we're going to set this equal to, what do we name it? Web app? Did I also give the username as web app? I guess I did. Yeah, probably not the best practice, but you can name it whatever you like. And another thing we're going to do is we're going to say db_port and set that equal to 3306, which is our XAMPP, shows us what port the MySQL server is running on. Okay, so now that should be it for that. Oh, we also need to add one more thing, which is the host, which we set to localhost. Okay, so that's all we need for that. Now let's try connecting to our DB server, make sure that it's working. So I'm going to create another file in here, and this is going to be a service. Basically, it connects to our database, and also it's going to be a service that lets us make queries to the database and get all the data we need to. So we can just say, let's do DB service. There's probably a better name for that. But Okay, in the DB service, we're going to call MySQL, require MySQL. We're also going to call it .env config. So we can say require .env. And we can say .env.config. Okay, so I'm going to create a connection here. So I'm going to say const connection. And I'm going to set that equal to MySQL, and we're going to create a connection with this. So it's going to require some, it's going to be an object that requires some keys. So I'm going to set this empty for now. Actually, I'll just fill it in as we go. So for our host, we have process.env.db, I think just host. And then we have user as process.env.username. Okay, and then we have password. Grab password. Database. And then last is the port. And I named this db_port, and that's all we need to connect to it. So we can just say connection.connect, takes a callback, and we'll pass in a parameter to see if there's any errors connecting. If there is an error, we'll simply just console.log this. Sorry, it's going to be error. We'll have a object key of message, so we'll know what message it will display. Otherwise, we'll just console.log, and we'll say db plus connection.state, which will tell us that hopefully it's connected. So now in our app.js, we can just include the DB service. So we can say right above here, we can say const DB service is equal to require DB service. Okay, so I'm getting some access denied for user, probably something with the password is bad. Let's see. Hey guys, so I had some issue connecting to the database. So what I did was I changed my username from web_app to tutorial, and in my .env I got rid of username and I set it equal to user. If you guys have any trouble with this, please let me know in the comments below and I'll try to help you out to the best I can. Okay, so now it says our DB is connected, which is excellent. So let's get back into here. Okay, so I'm going to leave this to the side now. And let's come in here. Okay, so in our DB service, what we need to do is I'm going to create a class. And this class is going to contain all the functions that we'll be using to get all the data or update data, insert data, or delete data. So for this tutorial, this generic service will be fine. So I'm going to just say class DB service. And first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a static function where I'm going to say get DB service instance. I only want one instance of this class. I don't want to keep recreating an object of this class every time. So there's no point in it. So what we can do up here is say let instance equal null. And then we can say return instance. We're going to use a question mark for a ternary operation. We're going to see if instance is not null. If it's not null, that means an object is already created, so return that. Otherwise, we're going to create a new instance of the DB service. Okay, let me do this. Perfect. So let me do this a little. Okay. So we'll need to export this using modules. Module.exports equal to DB service. So we're going to export this DB service class. And then in our app.js, I'm going to close out of this .env and this package.json and this CSS. We don't need that. So here, we're going to do our read function first. So what we're going to do here is say, we're going to check for our DB instance. So we're going to grab it. We're going to say const DB service. Sorry, const DB is equal to DB service.get, and we have access to this function get DB service instance. So this will get us the object back. So now we can create a function in here in this class. We can say we're going to use async await here to get our data. Okay, so we're going to call this function async get all data. We're going to add a try catch block here. And we're going to have an error, and then in the catch we'll say, so we'll just console.log the error for now. Okay, so let's get the try catch block. So in the try block, what we're going to say is const response. Okay, and then we're going to create we're going to say await, and then we're going to create a promise here. So in our promise, this is where we're going to handle the query. So we're going to have resolve reject. So if the query is successful, we'll resolve it. Otherwise, if there's any errors with the query, we're going to reject it. Okay, and in that reject, it'll go straight into our catch block, and we'll handle the error from there. Okay, so what we're going to do here is write the query. So we're going to say const query. And then in strings, we're going to just simply say select star from and our names table. And for good practice here, I'm going to capitalize all this. You actually don't have to, but it stands out from the keywords and the table names and the like variables, column names. Okay, so now we can say connection dot query, and we can pass in the first parameter will be the query, and then if you have any conditions where you're passing in data like from your function, you can have a array here that you'll pass in your variables. And so for example, let me show you. So if you have where ID is equal to, let's say 1, right? Well, we're going to leave a question mark here, and then you would say ID here. So it would parameterize the query value so that we can prevent SQL injection. Okay. And if you guys don't know what SQL injection is, please let me know in the comments below. I can create a video on it. And then we'll put a semicolon here. So here, we're going to have a callback function. So with 2 parameters, we'll pass in error or results. So we're going to say if error is true, we're going to reject, and we're going to create a new error object, and we're going to pass in error.message, which will be called by our catch block. Okay, so if not, what we're going to say is resolve results. So we'll do that. Okay, so down here, let's just console.log the response here. So let's see what we're getting here. All right, so now in our app.js, so we need to make a call to the function. So it's going to be, what do we call this? Get all data. Okay, get all data, and it doesn't take in any parameters. And we're going to set this equal to a variable called result. Okay, so now I'm going to make a fetch call, which we already have. And as you can see, we get an empty array here. So I'm going to comment this out so we don't have a lot of console.logs happening at once. So we get an empty array here, and what we're going to do here is just say return response. So we get an empty array here, so what we're going to do is say return response. And when there actually is some data in there, we'll see what that looks like. We'll console.log that as well. So we'll add this back, and I'm just going to comment it out for now. And our index.js, so we should be able to see the result here. Oh, we won't be able to because we're not returning anything. So this when you call this is actually going to return a promise. It's because we need to wait for this to finish. So here we'll say result dot then, okay, and then in our promise we're going to get the response back, and I'm not going to call this response because we have response up here. Okay, we'll just say some data, and then we're going to say response.json, and let's do data, and then we're going to also have a catch. Let's say there is some error, so we're going to do catch error, and we'll just console.log it. We won't really handle any error. We won't do any error handling here. We're just going to assume that it works in all cases. But we will catch it and console.log it in case we do run into him while we're trying to grab our data. Okay, so now you can see here we get a object which contains an array in the data key. All right, so here we're going to call load the HTML table. I'm going to pass it in here. We're going to pass data in here, but data is an object. So data, in order to access the array, because that's what we want to do, is we need to just access the data key. Oh. All right, so now let's refresh this. So let's see. So we're passing data empty array. Let's see what we're getting in here. Oh, there's a console error. So that's probably why. Let's get rid of that. Okay, cool, it's working. So data is empty. Okay, so let's get some data in here. Let's work on this create functionality. So in order to do this, in our app.js, we have our create method here, which for post, and we're just going to console.log and see what we get in the request.body. Okay, so above here, so I'm going to keep all my event handlers in the top, and then any helper functions, I'll keep them towards the bottom. So I'll try to group them as closely as possible. All right, so let's get some data here. So we're going to say const add name. So add name will have an ID of add btn. So we're going to say add btn is equal to document.querySelector. You can also use document.getElement by ID, but either way works. And then we're going to say add name btn. Okay, and we're going to add a onClick event here. And we're going to set this equal to a callback function. Okay, so in our callback function, what we're going to grab is the input value, basically name. So we'll say name is equal to document.querySelector. All right, so we gave that ID of name input, and we're going to grab the value. We'll grab the element first, and then we'll grab the value. So actually here, a better name for this would be name input. Okay, so what we're going to do next is we'll grab the value, and every time we send it to our backend, we're going to reset this value to be an empty string. So what we'll do is say const name is equal to name input dot value. Oh, okay, dot value. And then what we'll do is once we have that, we'll say name input dot value is equal to empty string. So what we're going to do is send this to our backend. We're going to do HTTP localhost port 5000, and we're going to say insert. Is that what let me make sure I created. Yep, insert. And then in here, we're going to send in some headers. So it's going to take an object. We're going to pass in a headers object as well. And we're going to say the content type is of type JSON. So we can say application/JSON. And then also we need to send in the body. So the body is going to include the JSON data. Okay, so we're going to say JSON.stringify, and then in here we're going to say name, name. And then we need to do one more thing here. We need to pass in the method type. So this is going to be of type post. Since we're actually sending in some data to our backend, we want to send it as a post data. Okay, so in our response here, we'll get a promise, and then we're going to convert that to JSON, and then we're going to get the data. And so this is going to be inserting, we're going to dynamically insert new data into our table. So we're going to create a new function here. We'll do insert row into table. And this will take a data variable for now. Let's leave it like that. And then in here, we're going to call this. And we're going to keep this pretty consistent. So we're also going to do the same thing. Pass in data into our function, which will be an object. And then we'll be able to loop through this like an array. All right. And then we'll also do a .catch. Actually, we won't need to, since we'll have a .catch in our backend. So if there's any errors, we'll just handle it. We'll be able to see it in our console here. So now what we need to do is once we send this data to our backend, what are we gonna do now? So first we're gonna just check and see that we get our data. So I'm gonna just type in test, add name, and we do get our data of test. Okay, so I'm just gonna grab the name here, and I'm gonna actually do it I'm gonna use object destructuring here so that we don't have to do request.body.name. We can just say request.body and just grab the name. Okay, so in our service, we need to create a new function. So I'll go down here, say async, and we're gonna say insert new, let's do new name. And it's gonna take a parameter of name. Okay, so we're gonna have another try-catch block. Everything will be a try-catch block because it's just good practice to have that, especially when you're dealing with promises and you have resolve and reject. It's really good practice. So we'll just console.log the error here. Oh, this is just error. Let's be consistent and say error. Okay, so now we'll do the same thing. So I'm just going to copy this. There's no need to rewrite everything. The only thing that's going to change here is our query and the way we handle this inside the query callback. So here we're going to say insert into, I'm going to remove this. Okay, so our table name is names, and we're going to say values. So we want to only insert in our table the name and the date added. Since our ID is auto incremented, we don't need to add into it. So we can have a parentheses before the values, and we can say we only adding to date, name and date added. Okay, so our values are coming directly from the front end. So whenever this happens, we need to parameterize our variables so that we don't deal with SQL injection. So like I said earlier, we are going to have question marks, and these need to be in parentheses. Oh, colon here. Okay, so now we're going to add a second parameter here, and let's put a comma. Okay, so in here we're going to expect name and date added. So I haven't created a date added variable yet, so I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to say date added. Oh man, what am I doing? Date added, new date. And SQL accepts date format in year, month, day. And it also will store the time as well, since we did it as a date time. So that's good. And instead of calling this response, what we're going to expect from here is an insert ID. Response is a good name to have it because it could also fail, but what we're expecting here is an insert ID. So if there's an error, we're going to reject it. Otherwise, what we're going to do is, since we're expecting only one result, I'm going to only call this result. And we're going to say result.insertID is what we're going to resolve, which will be returned into the insert ID. And what we're going to do here is we're going to return the name, date added, and ID back to the table so that we don't have to grab we'll have the name already in the front end, I guess, but it's good to just get the data from the back end and make sure that it's the same. All right, so we don't have to console.log it, but we can. So we're going to console.log insert ID. Okay, so now in our app.js, we're going to call this same DB instance. All right, we're going to say const result is equal to db.insert new name. And that's going to take in a parameter of name. Let me just make sure I called it that. Yep. Okay, result then we will get some data back. We're going to just say response.json. For now, we're just going to say success is equal to true, or not equal to true, but set to true. And then we'll also do a catch. Okay, so in our so now we can just send in the name. So we can say test. We'll add the name. It'll come to our backend, and you can see right here we get an insert ID of 1. And if you want to double check our database, we should get our first row here, which is great. Awesome, guys. So what we want to do now is return. Now you can see that no data was here. So that means when we do have a value, there should be a value that we're retrieving now. Insert row into data. Oh, we never handled the case, well, if there is a length of greater than 0. So what we want to do now is handle that. What we can do is we're going to do a .for each. All right. So we're going to say data.for each. We're going to just have a callback function. And then in here, we're going to retrieve an object, right? So we can just use some data destructuring. And we're going to say ID, name, date added. Since we're retrieving all the values back from the database. Okay, and then now our table HTML variable will come into handy. We're going to set that to an empty string. And we're only going to declare it if there is some data. All right, and also, if it goes into this if statement, we want to return. We don't want to execute anything below this. So what we're going to do here is say table.html, and we're going to override everything that's in here because this is going to be used when the table is first loaded. All right, so we're going to say, basically we're just adding table rows to it. We're not going to be overriding anything. Okay, table row. In the table row, we're going to add table data. Okay, so we're going to use string interpolation. So if I use these backtick symbols, I can say $, open close bracket, and I can just say ID like this. And now I don't have to escape the string and concatenate my variables. And I'm going to copy this 4 times, and then I'm going to end this table HTML with plus equal, and then the ending table row. Okay, so this will now be name. This will be date added. Okay, let's spell that right. And then in here, we're not going to actually have any variables. So here we're just going to have a button, which will be the delete button. And since we're getting the ID here, when we click on the delete button, we're going to need the ID. So this is a perfect time to set a data attribute in the button element, and we're going to add a class as well. So we're going to say delete row btn, and then we're going to close that, and then we're also going to add a data dash ID, and we're going to use our dollar open close bracket, and we're going to say curly brace, not bracket. We're going to say ID. Okay, cool. So next thing is we're going to have the edit button. So here we're going to create another button. And actually the edit button is going to be the same exact thing. It's going to have, except just instead of delete, it's going to be just edit. So we'll just call this edit. Data-ID will be the same. We'll need that because we'll want to know which row we're editing. All right. And then after the for each loop, we're going to say table.innerHTML is equal to table HTML. Okay, cool. So our date added is showing like that because it's needs to be converted to locale string. So in here we can just say new date dot to locale string and then open close parentheses. Okay, cool. So let's kind of enlarge that now. So it's okay, cool. And I think I added one more extra. Yeah, I added an extra greater than tag. All right, so now we're getting our data, guys. So we can add as many names as we want, and we need to handle that now when we insert data. So when we insert data, let's see, we are going to return the insert ID. Okay, so for our insert function, when we add a new name, we need the ID, name, and date added, right? So we're gonna send back an object here. All right, so we have the name already. We need the ID. So I'm gonna send these in proper order. So we have the insert ID. And then we need the comma here. And then we also need the date added. So date added. Okay, so we have our object. And then in here, we're gonna just return data is with the data. Keep it consistent. All right, so now in our front end, we created this insert row into table. So what we're gonna do is grab the table element and we're gonna just create a new row. All right, so let's do that. Okay, so here we're gonna get the table. We're gonna say document.querySelector. I'm gonna set that equal to table, tBody. You could just do tBody, but table is also fine too. Both ways will work. And then we're gonna say, we need to check for if there's no data. So if there no data exists, which means if you see here, we added a class of no data. So we need to check for this class, all right, if it exists. So is table data. It's a bad name for it, but meaning it just means that if their table data exists, okay? So basically what we're checking for is, does that class exist? No data, because we're already checking for if there is data or not in the table. So now we're going to say let table HTML equal to table row. So in our data variable, we're going to get an array of objects. So we can also say data.forEach. All right, and we can also destructure this name, ID, name, and date added. All right, so we need to check Okay, so we're gonna use a similar process that we did here. So I'm just gonna copy that. But in this case, we're only inserting one row. All right, so we're just gonna copy these four things. All right, so we get the ID, name, date added, and this way here we're calling it something different. Okay. We're calling date added because we keep it manually here. In the other instance in our column, it's date underscore added. So that's why we got to keep it that way. And we'll get the delete and edit button. And then also below here, we need to say table HTML plus equal. We need the ending close table row bracket. Okay. So now what we need to do is check for does no class data exist? Okay. So is table data true? So if table data is true, we're going to say table.innerHTML is equal to table HTML. That means it's just going to get rid of that HTML that exists and override it. If it doesn't, we're going to have an else condition. So we're going to say const is equal to new row, table.insert row. So this will create a new table row, and we're going to say new row dot inner HTML is equal to table HTML. All right, so let's see if that works. So I'm going to do test 3. And let's see if there was some error. I'm sure there was. Okay, data.forEach is not a function. Okay, so we need to see. We should be getting an. Okay, we're getting an object back. We're not getting an array back. So let's just confirm that. Yes, we're getting an object back, not an array of objects. Sorry about that, guys. So we can't use a forEach function here. So we can use a for-in array to loop through an object. Okay, so we're going to say var key in data. All right, so first thing we're going to do is check for if the key has the property of date added, because we want to have the new date here. Okay, so before we do that, the best practice is we need to check when we loop through an object. We want to check for if the data actually has that key property. Because if it doesn't and you try to do something, it'll throw a console error, and we don't want that. So in the if condition, if this is true, we'll say if key is equal to date added. What we're going to do is say data bracket key is equal to new date, data bracket key dot to locale string. Okay, awesome. And then the rest is just easy. So we just say table HTML plus equal. We're going to use backtick symbols here. And we can just say table data. And we can say data dash key. Get out of that. And the TD. Okay, so we have that. We have the 3 keys. Values, the ID, name, and date added, but we still need to have these 2, edit and delete. You guys probably knew about that. It's not an array of objects, it was just an object. All right, so now let's test that, shall we? So if we have test 5, okay, we are still getting some errors. Let's see what that is. ID is not defined here. Okay, got it. So we need to get the insert ID. Sorry, just the ID, which is coming directly from the data here. So as you can see, we'll get the ID. We can't just say ID because we're not in the loop. And we're getting data here, so we can just say data.id. All right, guys, it should work now. Awesome. Oh, let's see here. What is with our... Oh, our date time is wrong. Okay, so I made a mistake here. New date, the ending parentheses should have been after the key. All right, so let's see if that will be fixed now. So we can say test. All right, perfect. So our insert is working now. So let's get the delete working so that we don't have a bunch of data just keep popping up on us, so we can maintain it. Okay, so now we're gonna add a delete variable. Const delete btn is equal to document.querySelector. And I believe I kept the naming convention the same, but let me just make sure. Delete row btn. Okay, so the tricky part with this is we can't just add a variable like that. Since it doesn't actually exist in the DOM, technically, if there's no data, then we need to dynamically listen for it. So the way we can do that is by using the document.add event listener. We're going to say document.querySelector. So we need to grab something that already exists in the HTML in the DOM on page load. So one thing that's why we added the tbody here. So we can say table tbody. Okay, dot add event listener. It's going to be a callback. Oh, the first parameter is going to be a callback. Sorry, not a callback. It's going to be the event handler type, which is going to be click. Okay, and then we'll have a callback. Okay, so in our callback, in here we'll take the event parameter, and we're going to listen for the event. So we're going to say let's console.log the event.target, and let's see what we get. So let's say when I click on delete, I get this button, HTML element, and then I even for edit as well. So the edit and delete will work within this event listener. So we'll work on the delete first. All right, so if the event.target.class name, all right, so that'll return this class name, is equal to delete row dash btn. What we're going to do is we're going to create a new function, and we will send the ID to that function, and it will send it to the backend, and it will delete the row from the database. All right, so let's create that function. Let's create it right here below it. And I know I said I would keep all the event handlers on top, but it's good to just keep the functions as close as possible to where they're being called. So we'll just put it here. So delete, let's do delete row by ID. And we'll get an ID here. Okay, so we're gonna call delete row by ID, and in here we're gonna pass in event.target.dataset.id. So that'll pass down the ID from here. Okay, so we get the ID. We're gonna do a fetch call. Before we set that up in our backend, let's set it up. So here we will say app.delete. Okay, we're going to give the type as delete here. We're going to say delete and get an ID in the URL itself. Okay, so we'll have the callback as let's see, request response. Okay, and we're going to just simply console.log request.params. All right, so now we'll make the fetch call. We'll do let's just copy this. And then here, we're going to say delete / plus equal to ID. All right, and then in our headers, do we need to do anything? We need to give the method. This is going to be a method of type delete. All right. so that it can be picked up by our backend. And then we'll have a .then, which will give us a response of type JSON. One more, which will give us the data. Here we'll just return a true or false. So we'll just console.log that data. Okay, so I'm going to send this to our backend. Let's see, if we click on this, we get the ID as 1, which is exactly what we want. So let's set up the backend. So we'll do const object destructuring. We'll set that ID. We'll get the request.params. Okay, and let's create our function. So we have here delete row by ID. We'll grab the ID and we're gonna just say let we'll do ID is equal to parse int ID. All right, so we'll leave it like that. And this is a base 10, so you don't actually have to add it, but I just added for as an edge case, because some browsers won't always, it doesn't always work the same. So here, I'm going to copy, so this is going to be similar to insert, kind of, all right? So I'm just going to copy this. And I'm going to grab more space here. Okay, so here we'll get the response, and then we'll just say here, we'll say dot affected rows, and we'll just give it as a result. How about that? So that we can see what we actually get in the response. I want you guys to be able to see it. So we're going to say delete from the table name, names, where ID is equal to question. Okay, and then here we'll just say ID. Okay, so now here let's just console.log the response. And also I forgot to set this up in a try catch block, so let's go ahead and do that. All right, we'll place everything in the body of the try block. All right, guys, so let's see if I click on delete here. Oh, we're not even calling the function, so let's do that. Let's call this, let's copy this. All right, and then I'm also going to copy this as well. Okay, so here we're going to say delete row by ID, and then we'll just say success is equal to true. Okay, so if we call the backend here, we call delete. Okay, we got some errors here. Let's see what that is. Unknown column nan in where clause. Okay. Oh, am I even passing? I'm not even passing the variable down. That would be a good idea. All right, let's try that again. Okay, so it got deleted because the affected rows is 1. So if that affected rows is 1, then we know that the row was affected. So that means it got deleted in this instance, in this case. All right, so here we can just say return. Oh, so we're going to do resolve.affected rows. So return response, and then we're going to do a question mark. Response is equal to 1, question mark, true, otherwise false. And then you would also have a return false here. In the case the query or something broke within this code, we would want to return false, and then you would handle that in the front end. Okay, so we're going to just pass in let's do, this is where success, and then we'll just do data, since data will just be true or false. Okay, and then we're console.logging this. All right, so we'll console.log that, but after we delete it, what we would want to do is we want to reload the table. So there's several ways we could do this. In a real world application, what I would probably do is call, so on the page load, it calls this load HTML table, gets all the data. I would create a different function that grabs all the data again from the table without refreshing the page. It would just be a fetch call, and then we will call load HTML. But since this is just a tutorial, we will just refresh the page. It's kind of cheating, but it does the same thing. All right, so if I hit delete here, we can see that success is equal to true. So here, what we'll do is if data.success, all right, so if that is true, we will just say location.reload. All right, so let's give that a try. Awesome, guys. So delete is working now. I can delete everything. Let's try adding it and then deleting it. Awesome. All right, so next thing, let's get the edit going. So the edit one is kind of nice. It adds a little bit, involves a little bit more UI. So when we click on the edit button, we're gonna have a little HTML show up here that will have the input like this and the ID that will be affected. All right, so let's get that working. We'll have a section here. This section will have an ID of update row. Okay, and by default it'll be hidden, but just so that we can see it, we'll leave it out for now. And then we'll say label. What are we gonna do? Name. Because in this case, we're just gonna let the user only update the name. Type is equal to text. And then we're also gonna give this an ID of update name input. Okay, and then we also need a button that says update. Okay, and this will have an ID of update row btn. All right, so now by default this will be hidden. All right, and now in our front end, we're coming back to this event listener here. We're gonna also add and check for if the event.target.class name is equal to edit row btn. And again, what we'll do is we'll pass in the ID. So I'm just gonna copy this. I'm gonna create this function, call it edit row by ID. Okay, so let's create this function right below the delete one. Okay, and I'm going to now, so when we click on this edit button, what we need to do, we need to do several things here. So we need to show that HTML section. So we're gonna say const update section is equal to document.querySelector, and I believe I called that update section. Okay, update section.hidden is equal to false. So let's see, does that work? No, it doesn't. Let's see if there's any errors. There is. Cannot set proper. Okay, it's null. That means I gave it the wrong name. Update row. Update row. Okay, so if I click on that, okay, that shows. Cool. So we'll leave it there. And then what we'll do, so now we can have a event listener, not in here, just kind of like add btn. We'll add it, you know, let me place this right below this one for the update button. So update btn, is equal to, let's see, update row btn. So we're going to do document.query selector. Okay, so now we have that, right? So what we'll do is below here, we'll say update btn.onClick. We'll set this as a callback function. So we need to grab this, and what we need to do is we need to Alright guys, so what we need to do is I'm going to rename this. So I'm going to say handle edit row. This isn't exactly going to actually update the row in the table. All we're going to do here is actually just show this UI, and with this ID we're going to insert a data ID like we did for the delete and edit, and what we're going to do is set it for this button right here. Alright, so that we can grab it later. So we'll just say document.query selector. We'll do, what is it? Update row btn. Yep, update row btn. We're gonna grab we're gonna get the data set. We're gonna add an ID, and we're gonna set that equal to ID. Okay, so now if you see here in the HTML, this will have a data-ID of 10. All right, so that this will be useful for whenever we click the update button, we'll get that ID. We'll need that. So now we're going to grab the name. So we're going to say name is equal to document.query selector. What did I name this? Update name input, which is an ID. Update name input. Okay, so we'll get the name.value. Let's see, do we need anything else? So this is going to be an update, right? So in a way, this is going to be something called a patch. So we're not exactly creating a new row in the table, but we are updating something. So we're going to use patch in this case. All right, so here I have update. So I'm going to say app.patch. All right. And in here, this will be /update, and then request response. So we're going to send some data through the body. All right. So I'm going to just copy this DB instance, get it ready. All right. And we also need to grab the ID and the name. So we need to just grab, we're going to pass the ID in the name. So we're going to say const ID / name request dot body. Okay, so we'll make a fetch call here, and also fetch call, and in the fetch call I'm going to just copy this. We're going to say update. Don't need that /, have some headers. Not headers, we're going to just pass in a body in the method. So the method is going to be patch. Okay, in the body, we are going to use json.stringify. And then we're going to have the ID. And to get the ID, we're going to say document.query selector. I would have probably done that up here, not in the fetch itself, but it's fine for this case. So query selector, we need to grab the ID, right? So we can say, oh, actually we have the ID from this. So I'm going to call this updated name input. We don't need to use document.query selector twice. We can just say this.dataset.id. Then we can also grab the ID. Sorry, not the ID, the name. So we can say updated name input.value. All right, so that'll get us the data we need to pass it to the backend. And then we'll do then response .json. Oh. And then the data will just be another true and false in this case. So we'll just do if data dot success is true again. We'll just reload the page. In practice, we would probably hide the HTML element, update the table, but in this case, we'll just reload the page. All right, so now we need to create a function back here. Okay, we're gonna call this async. We're gonna create the async function. We're gonna call it update row by ID. I'm gonna do update name to be more specific. So we're gonna get an ID and name. And I'm gonna just copy this whole thing. Okay, so let's rewrite this query. And we're gonna say update. All right, and we're gonna say update name. Sorry, not update name. The table name is, what is it again? Names? Yeah, names. We're gonna set name equal to question mark here. And then we're gonna say where ID is equal to question mark. All right, so we need to give in the where condition what ID row we're changing. So in our query here, we'll say name first and then ID. Okay, so yep, this should be fine. This should be fine, okay. Well, let's give it a try, guys. So test 1 will now become test 2. We hit update. Let's make sure that I need to do response dot, sorry, I need to get the result, right? So let's just copy it directly from, we already did this, so we don't need to do it again, right here. But let's call this update name by ID. And also we need to pass name here. Let me make sure it's in the correct order. ID and name, yep. Okay, let's do this. Let's call this test 2. All right, so we got some errors here. Let's see what the cannot read property of undefined. Okay. How about we just see what the result is? Console.log result. Let me make sure that my query is correct. So my query is an update. Should be fine. That should be correct. Okay, it looks like there must have been some error. Let's try that again. Oh, it did. Oh. Let's see. There's something went wrong. Okay, just had to save that script. So here, let's edit it again. Let's do test 2. Okay, so there's something wrong with, okay, unknown column nan and where clause. So we're not getting, that means we're not getting the ID. So the reason why we're getting an empty object here in our backend is because in our headers, we need to say the content type is of application JSON. So if you forget to do that, then it won't be able to send it as what we're expecting. Receive the data as we're expecting. So application/JSON. Okay, so let's put it there. Let's try this. So let's name this test 2 update. Now we get the data back in the backend. So now I'm gonna get rid of this, and I'm going to uncomment this. Okay, so let's try this. All right, so we're getting the affected rows as 1. Awesome. So we'll do affected rows, and I'm gonna just Control Z because this should, okay, yeah, I'm gonna leave it like that. So as you can see, it's already been updated to test 2. Let's update it to test 3. And let's see here, what do we get at the response? Didn't, okay, success was equal to false. Response, oh, here we need to say affected rows. That's why. Oh, and I just deleted that. Okay, so let's try that. Test 1, we'll do an edit. Let's change that to test 2. And now it's test 2. And we could update the date added, but we don't need to do that. We could update like the new date that it was added, updated. But let's move on, and I want to show you just how this search would work. So these queries are pretty basic. I hope you guys are able to follow along, and if you guys have made it this far, I really appreciate that, and I hope you have learned something. We're going to write one more query for this search, and that should be the end of it, and I hope this is super helpful. All right, so here we will add app.get search, and we're going to give a name. Yes, we're going to pass in the name in the URL. Okay, request response. You guys know it already. And let's do this. Let's get the, instead of ID, it'll be name. And then in our backend, let's create one more function, async search by name. Oh, that should be, yep, async. Okay, and this will get the name. Okay, so let's do the get all function. I'm going to copy this. All right, so here we're going to say we'll get everything, we'll get all the data, but we're going to say where name is equal to question mark. So in here we will just pass in name. All right, so we'll get the results. It'll be the same thing, and let's handle it in the front end. So we will, let's add another variable here, search btn. Okay, we'll get the ID of that, query selector, search btn, and then we'll just do it right below this, since this is the last function. And I don't know what I'm doing. Search btn.onClick is equal to function. All right, so we will grab this value here. So this value is going to have in, so we'll say search query. Actually, it would be better to say search value is equal to, so the ID here, so document dot query selector, and then ID search input. All right, and we're gonna just say dot value here. All right, so we'll get the value directly. We'll make the fetch call. I'm going to just copy our similar one to this. We're gonna actually do the same exact thing. It's just gonna be a different route here. Update, not update, search. And then we're gonna pass in the name, which is gonna be the search value. All right, cool. So shall we give it a try? We can say test 2. Oh, that's not very helpful. How about that? Okay, so that, let's see, did that even hit our back end? Search value, and of course we're not doing anything here. Let's copy the get all, shall we? So we'll do this. Okay, so instead of get all, we'll say search by name. I hope that's what I called it. Let's see, search by name, yep. And this is gonna take a parameter of name. All right, so let's search by test. We get no data. All right, so I'm gonna refresh this. I'm gonna add a couple names here. Test 3. Okay, so let's search by test 3. Cool. We get that. We can edit this. Test 5. Refresh. And everything gets refreshed. All right, guys. That's what I wanted to show you. I know this was probably long, but I really hope that you guys learned something. If you did, please consider liking and subscribing. Let me know if you guys want a more advanced MySQL tutorial or just SQL tutorial in general. If there's any projects that you would like to see implemented. I'm looking forward to your comments. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.